which is a sort of continuation, but a little bit with a break. Okay. Kum Lenin Ablat Gemara, it's Mitzvah Shabbos Pashas Bahar, and today's blot is Daf Ayin Hey. Just to summarize what we're doing at Daf Ayin Dal and Beis, and we'll begin with Ayin Dal and Beis, about 6 lines from the bottom of the page. Just to summarize, we talked about that anyone who is Tameh cannot eat from Truma anywhere. And we learned it out from, it says Ish Ish. It says if there was a person, a descendant from Aaron HaKohen, by saying Ish Ish, you mean anybody. And therefore something that it could be by a man or a woman. So it must be talking about Truma. Even though the Pasuk said that if they are Tameh, they shouldn't eat from Kachim. We're going to learn we are talking about Truma. We're not talking about Kachim at all because men and women are equal there. So we're talking about Kohanim that are a male or a woman. And we also said that Rabbi Shmuel came along and said, when it says in the Pasuk Teruah, and it says in the Pasuk Zav, we're talking about somebody he only saw twice, or a Mitzvah that's only tentative Mitzvah. So both of these, there's no carbon involved. And because there's no carbon involved, we're talking about Truma and that sunset, that's when they become permitted. And then we brought that there were 3 psukim. And one pasuk says immediately as they go to mikveh, they become Torah. One pasuk says by sunset, the Hashem in the Torah. One pasuk says by the carbon. So we said there's 3 different laws. When it comes to Meiser and you were Tameh, as soon as you become pure, you went to the mikveh, you can eat. If it's Truma, you have to wait until sunset. And if it's if you were Tameh that has to bring a carbon like a woman who gave birth, then you have to wait till you bring your carbon. So it comes along the bottom of the page. Shisha had a question. You took that pasuk of Ish Ish, which the pasuk actually says, "Bakachim lo yochal," don't eat kachim. And you took it that the word kachim is not referring to kachim, it's actually referring to truma. So Rav Shisha, I have a problem with that. And you're telling me that it says also by a woman who gave birth. And you tell me that the pasuk there is talking about kachim, right? You're talking about, it says in the pasuk that you have to wait until you become, until you bring the kippur, you bring a carbon. You said it's not talking about truma, it's talking about kachim. So that's the question. Rav Shisha said, how can you say when it talks about a woman there and it says Ad Malois Tara until her days of Tara elapse, and then so on and so forth. And you said it's talking about sunset, it's talking about Truma. How can you tell me it's talking about Truma? See, about Tanya, we learned the following. It says in the Bryce, Ainly, it says like this. So this is how the whole parsha of Tazria begins. It says, speak to the Jewish people. And it says Bnei Yisrael. So ainly the Bryce says, we would have thought El Bnei Yisrael, talking about the Jewish people. Giyatis, what about a woman who converted to Judaism? Or Shivcha Meshchareres, a woman who was liberated and now she's a full-fledged Yid. Minayin, how do you know that they also have all the same laws, that if they have a boy 40 days and a girl 80 days before they become finally pure? Talmud Leimer, Ish, it says Ish. Now, the problem is, you're telling me the pasuk this talking about here is talking about Truma and that it became Tameh. You have to wait until the sun sets and everything else, and so on and so forth. How can a Giyaris ever eat Truma? You tell me talking about Truma and not talking about Kachim, it's talking about Truma. So tell me, Giyaris v'shivcha, b'nais meichel Truma, a convert or a shivcha. They're not shaykh to eat Truma. So how can you tell me that it's talking about over there that is talking about Truma and not about Kachim? Omar Rabba says, Rabba, you think that the pasuk is talking only to Kain? Let me ask you a question. The law, you tell me it's not talking about Truma, but see, if it says in the pasuk, the Chol Kodesh Loisiga, it says, in that very parsha, it says that the Chol Kodesh, when she becomes Tameh, she shouldn't touch. It says 33 days, or 7 days she's Tameh, the next 33 days, any blood that she sees, she's tar. And then, and said the pasuk, she should not touch any kodesh, don't touch any kodesh, and the migdash she shouldn't enter until Malayas Tara, until the days of Tara are completed. Now it says the pasuk kodesh leisiga, and it comes to tell you the rabbish is a truma that is coming to include truma as well. Now, if talking about, even though it says kodesh, it means truma, but you're telling me that how can you learn that it's talking about truma when you said a minute ago that the pasuk is giving you different rules and which apply to different people. Not all the rules apply to everyone the same. So some of the rules apply only to a woman who's a kohen. Some of the rules, for example, the tumah and the tara apply to anybody, even a geyeris. So therefore, there's no problem to say when it says in the pasuk that you have to wait until Maloyas you made Tara, until it expires the day of Tara, which is until the day is over, until nighttime, can be talking about Truma, is talking to a Kohenes, it's not a problem. Certain laws are restricted to certain people. Says the Gemara, the Tlasa Kroi Betruma Lamalis. Why do we have now, based on what we learned till now, it seems we have 3 psukim now regarding Truma. When it says in the pasuk, for example, that by Ishish it said they shouldn't eat kachim, you told me it means truma. So that's one pasuk. And then you said that, and then we have this pasuk here, ad meloyis imei tara, but it says b'chol kodesh l'siga, you told me that it means truma as well. By the woman it says b'chol kodesh, it means truma. And then it says ubo hashemesh v'toyer, that the sun will set and then you are pure, you can go ahead and eat. And even though it says the word kachim, you tell me it's truma. Why in the world do we need 3 psukim regarding truma? Says the Gemara, the closer crowd, why do you keep talking about Truma? We need all 3. Because the ma'ad asher if all we had was the pasuk that you have to wait until you become Torah, then we wouldn't know exactly what do you have to do to become Torah. In the pasuk it says that ish they shouldn't eat, right? And we said before, it's talking about Truma. Ad asher till they become Torah. Which particular aspect of Torah is it? We don't know what exactly do you mean when it said become Torah. Doesn't mean we go to mikveh, doesn't mean when you go to bring a carbon. When can you start eating truma? Until you become Torah. What's the definition of Torah? In another pasuk to spell it out. Uvor hashemish, the sun will set v'torah. It says in another pasuk when the sun will set v'torah. So now we know that when it comes to truma, we know exactly when it is sunset. Fine. So let's just say that. If you only told us the pasuk that when the sun sets, that's when you can eat truma, I would have thought, you know what? I would have thought, we're talking about somebody that there's no kapara involved. There's nothing. They don't have to bring a carbon. The only question of truma. So come sunset, they went to make it more or less clean, and the sunset now they can go eat truma. But what about if this particular person has to? Let's say it's a woman, Baskari gave birth. So not only does she have to go to mikveh and wait for sunset, she also has to bring a carbon. But we would have thought maybe when even though she wants to eat truma, she has to wait until she brings a carbon. The carbon is not just to allow her to eat kachim, but maybe also to allow her to eat truma. Even though the pasuk says when sunset you can start eating, I would have thought that sunset you can start eating is referring to somebody who doesn't have to bring a carbon. I will we're in Daf Ayin Hey 5 lines at the top of the page. I would have thought Hanimili de la Bakapara, but there's no carbon involved. Avol de Bakapara, if there's a carbon involved, Ema de Maisa Kapara, maybe you have to wait until the morning. Therefore, you need that third pasuk, Kosher Rachmana Ad Malay, says that by a woman who gave birth, that she can start eating Ad Malayis Meitara, when the day of Tara is over, which means nighttime. I mean, even though we're talking about somebody who has to bring a carbon, she can start eating truma at night. Kachim, not till the carbon, but truma at night. So then what do you need the first pasuk for? I thought. So why do you need the first pasuk? Ish. It says until you do your tara. What's that pasuk? We already know that nighttime from B'tayr, we already know that even if you have to bring a carbon, we know that that at nighttime for truma is good enough. So what do we need the first pasuk of ish? So you want to say, you know why? Because I would have thought, I would have thought if she waits until nighttime. That's it. It's good enough. The 80 days are over. Waits at nighttime. That's the Tara. How do I know he has to physically go into the mikveh? Because she has to do something to become Torah. And that cannot mean a carbon because as soon as nighttime comes along, she's already Torah. So it must be mikveh.
Where is it now? 75A?
75A. Oh, someone can tell me what we're up to?
75A1, beginning of the first paragraph.
75A1.
Bottom of the first column.
Okay, now the Gemara says, before we learned, yesterday you learned, that the pasuk of ish, if a person was a tzerua or a zav, he was a mitzera or a zav, and we said that mitzera means a tentative mitzera, only the first week of musgar, and we said that the zav means they only saw twice, so there's no carbon. Both the cases, there's no carbon involved, and therefore, it's and we know that because it talks about if you become tummy from a mace where there's no carbon involved, so therefore Rabbi Shmuel said that we're talking about truma, where there's no carbon involved. What about the ones who argue with Rabbi Shmuel? What about the ones who argue the Shmuel, who say that the pasuk is talking about a zav also 3 times, and a mitzayra who was muchlet, that was definitely confirmed to be a mitzayra, where there is a carbon involved? So obviously the pasuk is not talking about truma. The pasuk must be talking about kachim, because by truma you don't have to wait to bring a carbon, and by kachim you do. So that pasuk, when it says vitar, you got to do something to make yourself clean, is talking about bringing a carbon. So according to the one who argued Rabbi Shmuel, you now have two psukim when it comes to kachim. So Gemara asks, well, half Tana, the Rabbi Shmuel, this Tana who argues with Rabbi Shmuel, the Omar, they say, what kind of zav? We talk about Baal Shoshi, so 3 times. And we talked about one that was already confirmed to be Mitzayda. And when the pasuk says, Bahai ad asher yita, when it says in the pasuk by ishish, until you do something to make yourself pure, is not talking about just going to the mikveh, because if we talk about kachim, you actually have to bring a carbon. It means adamaisi kapara. You actually got to bring a kapara. Is today krayba kachalamali? What he did two psukim. Here you have the pasuk adasha yiter, and then by a woman it says there after the 80 days it says there v'chipar olav aleh. He brings the kapara, and then she can go ahead and eat. So why do we need two psukim? Why do we need 2 psukim to tell you that by kachim you have to wait to the carbon? It says that v'chipar oleh hakoyin v'tihara. So we have 2 psukim. V'chipar oleh hakoyin, talk about a woman who gave birth, and there is only after she brings the carbon she's tired. And we had the pasuk ish. And that tells us that according to this Tana, that is talking about somebody has to bring a carbon. It's only after they bring adashiyita, you bring the carbon, then everything's all right. So my question is, today, why need two psukim? We need 2 psukim. If you only knew that a woman who gave birth has to wait until she brings the carbon on the 81st day or the 41st day before she can participate in kachim, I would say, you know why? She was tummy for 80 days. She was tummy for 40 days for a male. So therefore, I would say that's why it makes sense that she has to wait till she brings the carbon. When it comes to zav, it's only 7 days. Maybe as soon as the 7 days are over and goes to the mikveh, the sun sets, good enough. Who said you have to wait till you bring a carbon before you can participate in kachim? So therefore, let it say the pasuk by an ordinary person who is a zav. So the yikazak just say zav. Then I would say, you know why zav is very strict, and therefore you have to wait for a carbon. Why is zav very strict? Well, huta miklali is never a circumstance if the person is a zav that he's tired until it finishes, until it stops oozing out. When it comes to a woman, the law by a woman is that the first 7 days she is tummy. The next 33 days, any blood that she sees is called dam toir. So Mahatayra, she's permitted to have relations with her husband during those 33 days. So by a girl, the first 14 days, the blood she sees, she's tummy, and the next 66 days is tired. And we had the Gemara Nida, the whole question whether, one, she has to stop first and then continue, or even continue flowing the whole time. But the bottom line is, while blood is flowing, she is tired. Just the Rabbanon say you shouldn't have any relations, but from the Torah you could. So therefore we see there's a leniency that this very thing that makes a tummy can also be tired. So maybe she doesn't have to wait for a carbon. So therefore, that is why we have 2 psukim. That's another question. It says in the pasuk that now it talks about if a vessel comes in contact, and the pasuk says that if something fell inside a vessel, a carcass or something fell inside a vessel, made a tummy, and then it says what you do is b'mayim. The pasuk says b'mayim yuva, take this keli and put it in the water in the mikveh, and v'tamei ad ha'erev, it is tummy until the night, and then it becomes tired. So it seems to the pasuk mikveh alone is not good enough. You have to wait till sunset. So it sounds like we're talking about truma, because where else do you find that mikveh is not good enough? Only by truma. Is normally, what do we need this pasuk for? We already know from the 3 psukim we had before that as soon as sunset comes along, everything's all right when it comes to the koyin. So when it comes to the keli, the same thing. What do you know the pasuk for? It says that this pasuk is actually coming to talk about not eating and something, talking about touching. It's saying this. Yeah. It's talking about touching. It says the Gemara, the Tanya. What do you mean talking about touching? The Tanya we learned. In other words, not only can't a kohen eat truma until sunset, that also a keli what's tamei cannot touch truma until sunset. How do I know that? So Gemara says,
Lost
the
the
time
place.
you look at
I lost the place. I lost
Somebody
the
help
place.
him. Somebody help Ben.
75A2 in the middle of the first paragraph on the left column.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Tiny learned with Tomei, you learned, and the Keli remains Tomei. It's a right, put it in the water, but mime yuva, Vitame ada erev, then Vitoy. If it's a Vitame yochel, I would have thought like, I would have thought that what? That is still Tomei completely. That so there's a Tamalay with Vitoy. It doesn't say at night the yitter it'll become tahir then. It says Vitoy, which sounds like already it was tahir. I mean, before nighttime was already tahir. If even if it's already tired from before nighttime, yochal akol in every respect is tired time alone tummy, it's still tummy till night. Okay, it says how can it be tummy and tired at the same time? So it depends for what. Can le maisa here we're talking about maisa, but if you want to touch maisa sheni, if this Kaylee wants to touch maisa sheni, fine. But because as soon as it went to the mikveh, it's all right. Can the truma, if you wanted to touch truma, then it's not all right until the sunset. Says the Gemara, the Eifach, I know, maybe it's the other way around. Maybe Maisa, you have to wait till nighttime, and Truma, maybe as soon as it goes to the mikveh, it's already all right. We had this discussion yesterday. Since when it comes to eating, we're far stricter with the laws of eating Truma. Who can eat Truma and all the things that we had yesterday. Than Maisa. So therefore, if we have a stringency that you have to wait till nighttime, it makes more sense that it's true, but you have to wait till nighttime and not Maisa. Therefore, Hamira, Negia, the Truma, Negia, the Maisa. So too, when it comes to touching, it's more Chamber, the Truma, than it comes to the Maisa. It makes more sense. So the Gemara, the boy says one answer. Another answer is Negia, the Truma, Mahachanaf. Another answer is that we actually, now we're talking about that we're talking about touching of truma, not just eating a truma, when a kohen can eat truma, but talking about touching a truma. We actually learned it from somewhere else, not from this KV, from somewhere else. The boys having to get truma. We learned that to give truma from elsewhere. We're talking about a tvul yoy. If somebody went to the mikveh, it has to wait till sunset, and not only for eating, like we learned till now, because there's always lo yoichel, but also even for touching. Because says the pasuk b'chol kodesh lo yisiga that you shouldn't touch kodesh is that as harem la'oichel ein el negea. Maybe it's talking about touching as well. It says the pasuk b'chol kodesh lo yisiga. It said by a woman b'chol kodesh lo yisiga. You shouldn't touch kodesh, and in the mikdash you shouldn't walk in. So we're comparing whatever you're doing with the touching the kodesh is the same thing with the mikdash. Makish kodesh, just like the mikdash. What happens if you are tummy and you walk inside and you get chorus? So af kodesh davar sheyesh by netil neshama. So too when it talks about over here touching, you're talking about something where you die for, and which is what only if you eat. You get chorus, not if you touch. When Negia, Netilis Neshama Leka, and by Negia, there's no Netilis Neshama at all. If you touch something, there's no Netilis Neshama at all. The high the Afki Belosh Negia, Hachakam Negia Kachila. I want you to know that touching is like eating. That you know that just like in why do we talk about touching? Though there's no chiv mitzvah, we're trying to tell you that the same law that applies to eating truma applies to touching. It's just like eating truma. It's you're only allowed to when it's nighttime. So too when it comes to touching truma, you're only allowed to when it's nighttime. So that's what we learn out this din of nighttime, and not from the din of the cave. We learn out from here as well. Okay, psuadaka. Now we go back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah talk about somebody's a psuadaka, and the pasuk says psuadaka krushavcha. A psuadaka is someone that that something is wrong with his male member. And a krushavka is when it's cut off. So the Gemara says, now this psuadaka we said is not allowed to marry a Yiddish woman, but it could marry a Giyaris, could marry a Meshucheres. It says the Gemara psuadaka is Mantana, so Tzedakah, and we said before, interesting thing. We said that if he was married to his wife when they were all right, he was a kohen, and then afterwards something happened, but she had no relations with him afterwards, she can continue eating truma. Says the Gemara, Mantana, who holds that Mishtameres Lebi Psula, who holds that even though she can no longer have relations with him from the Torah because he's a Tzedakah, nevertheless, even though she can continue eating as long as she didn't physically have that relationship. It's actually an argument. We had an argument if a woman was engaged to someone that should bas kohen, someone should now be married. Do we say that since she is waiting to commit to live with someone that's forbidden to her, she's already forbidden to truma or not? In other words, the idea that anticipating to do a bia of Issa, but she hasn't done it yet. It's a machlekes we had before between Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, and Tanakama. So this is the machlekes. And Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, and Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon both said that we don't care that tomorrow if she marries a guy it's forbidden. Right now she's only engaged, nothing happened, so she can continue eating truma. So same thing over here. In the case of Tzedakah, true it's her husband, but since they never lived together, once he became Tzedakah, she can continue eating. Rabbi Yechon says no. I feel Rameh, even according to Rameh, who argues with Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Elazar, and he holds that since you're anticipating a bia that's forbidden, according to Rameir, already now she can no longer eat truma. So in this case over here, you would think according to Rameir, since it's her husband and she's anticipating to live the Isa, she can no longer eat truma. Shiny hachir is different. She quite achla. Rabbi Yechanan says that since she was eating till now because of this husband, in a legitimate way. So even though now he became a tzedakah, if she didn't physically live with him since then, she could continue eating truma. So why didn't Rabbi Elazar buy into that? Because he says shekvar achla lo yamrin. He says shekvar achla. This concept, because yesterday she was able to eat, that therefore she could continue eating. I don't agree with that, and I'll prove it to you. But he like so Bas Yisrael, a Yiddish girl, shenisas lekoyin. A Yiddish girl is married to a koyin. Lamei's baila and her husband died. She can no longer eat truma. Why don't you use the same argument? Since she was eating till now, she can continue eating. Let her continue eating because she already ate. Obviously, what happened yesterday is irrelevant regarding tomorrow. Rabbi Yechon says, what are you comparing the two? Rabbi Yechon says, Hasam Paka Kinyani. Over there, her husband is dead. The only reason why she was eating because of her husband. But the husband is no longer there. He died, was divorced. So, of course, she cannot continue eating. Here, the guy in Tzedakah, even though she's not allowed to live with him now, but they're still married, and as long as they don't have any relationship, everything's all right. Because he is still her husband, therefore she can continue eating truma.
What page are we on? Excuse me.
Ayin Hey Amar Aleph, on the bottom of the page with the 2 dots. 75A, about 8 lines at the bottom of the page.
75A3.
A3, is it?
Yep.
75A3. Okay. Thank you.
We learned what is an example of a b'tzuadaka? Now, a b'tzuadaka, it means literally that it was, Rashi says it from the word petzatach, a wound, that his male member was wounded. Kol shenivtzu beim shaloi, if his his testicles were wounded, afilu achman, even just one of them, afilu nikvu, even if there was a puncture in one of them, nafilu nimukai, and even let's say that it disintegrated inside the sac, and that's and shrunk. Vafilu chasre, even if a little bit is missing from the testicles, it already becomes a p'tzuadaka, because it's incapable of bearing children. There's a whole discussion today amongst the rabbis if today we're either naturally or with medicine we can overcome these issues and you could procreate, is it still considered a p'tzuadaka?
It's actually usually not an issue. If someone's got one testicle, there's no reason they can't have children.
You're right. We'll see in a minute. Gemara will make a difference if you're born that way or if it happened afterwards.
Right.
Amar Bishmal. The Noish Rabbi Yechon Bishmal, the son of Yechon said, Shemaiti, I heard Mepich Achami from rabbis Bekedem B'Yavne. Kol she'ein le ela be'achas, if somebody only has one testicle, ein ela saris chama v'kosher. He's considered a saris chama. Saris chama means sterile. From chama is the sun or the heat, is sterile, and we're going to learn that if somebody becomes sterile because it's born that way or something, natural causes, That's not a psua daka. That's not somebody is incapable of having children. There's nothing wrong with getting married. It's the kosher. It's only if something happened after birth, not naturally, natural causes, then we call them a psua daka. The more asks, "Sorry, it's chama sagdata." You call that sorry chama if somebody is born with the one test. How does that chama? So chama, where Rashi learns is very important. Rashi says that if it happened through a fever, if somebody became sterile because of fever, and why that's important is because Rashi next page says that when do we say that a saris chama is not a psudaka is if it happened either you were born that way, or there were thunders and loud noises that startled you, and as a result of that something happened and you became sterile. But it sounds from Rashi there, but if it happened as a result of sickness, it's not called natural causes. And there's a very interesting argument here between the Rishonim. If the Rosh and others, the Rambam, if somebody becomes sick, is that called natural or not? Do we say that you're partly at fault? Because if you were 100% taking care of yourself, hygiene, or you were dressing properly, or taking care that you should be safe and well, then it would never have happened. So you have to shoulder some of the responsibility, and therefore those are trying to argue that if it happened as a result of getting sick, since you're partly responsible, you become a tzedakah. But Rashi says over here, on this Rashi right here, 2 lines at the bottom, Rashi says that no, if it's a fever, it's not your fault, and therefore that's called b'dei shemayim. That's called natural causes, and if as a result of this terrible fever that you had, you became a tzedakah, then you are still kosher and get married. So interesting, because Rashi on the other page doesn't use that example. I'll show you in a minute.
Lamaisa speaking, though, the most common cause of someone to lose a testicle nowadays is testicular cancer amongst the boys. So then they have one testicle removed surgically. So how does a person like that fit in halachically?
I guess you can argue that within sicknesses itself, there's some sicknesses there's nothing you can do, like cancer. There's nothing you can do to prevent it. And therefore we call that b'dei shemayim. To save your life, you have to do that. So that's called b'dei shemayim. We're talking about a fever, a sickness. You have a terrible case of flu or something. And the best proof is the last 2 years, flu cases are very, very low, which means that if you take certain precautions, you can prevent all that. So therefore, that's the argument. Is that called b'dei shemayim?
But practically speaking, that's not really a reason nowadays people lose a testicle. Nowadays, it's cancer of the testicle.
We don't only mean losing a testicle. Sterile. Anything.
Then you'd have to lose both.
The other thing that people who lost nothing and they're sterile, they can't procreate.
Well, that's a different thing. That's
saris chama. Yeah. That's also saris. Right. It doesn't only have to be losing testicle. Okay. So the Gemara says that he's like a saris chama and he's kosher, he can go ahead and marry. So the Gemara now says the Gemara, you're telling me here that if it was a puncture through and through, then you cannot procreate. I'm talking about the testicles had a puncture through and through. You're telling me you lose the ability to create, to manufacture semen and to be able to procreate. Well, Gabba, there's a story of the person, the Solukadikl, climbed a palm tree, the Charze Silva Bebeim, and a sharp edge of the branch or something poked him in his testicles, and it made a hole through and through both sides. And the nafik b'nei kechute mugla, and then it's out of that semen came oozing out. So in other words, it went through the thing that generates all the semen, and yet va'olid, his wife gave birth to children. So there's a question on the Gemara. Shmuel sent this story to Rav to ask him to explain, because we said just before that Nikah, the Mishnah said if there's a puncture through the testicles, he's a psudaka. Can't prove. Rav said, "Say the Chazer Albana. If I would be you, I would investigate this woman. Ma'ayin him, whose children they are, because they're definitely not his." In other words, what the Gemara is saying here is that there's a halacha in the Gemara, and that's how it is, and you bring a proof from a story, verify what actually happened there. Okay. Now, in this Gemara we're going to learn today, you can talk about the anatomy of the male member, which I'm not a mumcha at all, so I'm going to have to go through it quickly because I don't really know exactly what I'm talking about, as we'll see in the bottom of the page. If it was natural causes that caused this person to become sterile, he is kosher. And Rashi says over here, What are the examples of a Patsua Daka? Rashi here says either through, let's say, thunders or hail that made a lot of cracking noise, or born that way. Rashi does not give the example of somebody became very sick, a high fever and somehow or another that caused them to become sterile. Rashi omits that. So based on that, many Rishonim understand Rashi, that Rashi holds that sickness is your responsibility. But the Rashi in the page before says that sickness is one of the causes of natural causes. So Rashi is a little bit difficult to work out.
Well, one may be talking about the testicles, which you can get sterile like from mumps infection, and the other's probably talking about, as you say, the male member, which is, it's different.
Could be. Okay, very good. That's why we need doctors over here on the show to give us insight to what's going on.
Well, the eye doctor doesn't necessarily know all that much about it, but anyway.
Okay.
The eye doctor sees everything.
Very good. Says the Gemara, Omar Rav said, I'll prove it to you. He's right. Because the Karina, we say Patsua. The Loi Karina, we don't say Ha Patsua. We say the word Patsua as if it was born this way. Ha Patsua would sound like, what do you call it? If it would have said Ha Patsua, it would have sounded like that it was born that way and he would be innocent. But because it's Patsua means it happened sometime during the course of his life, and therefore Patsua Daka is possible. And Patsua Daka happened in the course of your life, but if it was natural, then if it's born that way, for example, it's a natural, then it's not you're allowed to get married. It's not possible also to marry. The Masnita Tana, the Bryce we learn, Tana number, it says Lo Yavi Patsua. In one pasuk it says Lo Yavi Patsua, and then right afterwards it says Lo Yavi Mamzer. So what's the connection between a Patsua and a Mamzer? Mala Halam B'dei Adam. The only way that you can have a Mamzer is by human behavior. Avkan B'dei Adam. When we say a Patsua Daka cannot marry into the Jewish fold, we're talking about it happens through human behavior. Amar Rabba says Rabba Patsua is Bikulon. In all three examples, we'll soon see what the three examples are. Is Patsua, where there was a wound and they've also to marry, or Dach Bikulon, or they were crushed. All three cases we'll soon see, and Krus Bikulon, or they were cut Bikulon, or they were all cut. Patsua Bikulon means Bein Shenivtza Hagid. It doesn't matter whether there was the Gid itself, the male member, was Nivtza, was wounded. Bein Shenivtza Bein, whether the testicle was wounded, and Bein Shenivtza Chute Bein, or whether it was the different veins over there of the babe, which carry the sperm. Any of these three that were wounded renders the person a Patsua Daka. Dach, which is crushed, be called the same thing. Bein shenidach hagid, whether the male member was crushed. Bein shenidach bein, whether the testicles are crushed, and bein shenidach chute bein, whether it was crushed was those veins that carry the sperms. Karus and cut be cool in the same thing. Bein shenichas hagid, the male member was cut. Bein shenichas bein, whether the testicles were cut, or bein shenichas chute bein, or those veins that carry the sperm.
It would seem from this that someone who's had a vasectomy can't marry a Jewish girl.
That's a very good point. It would seem so. It would seem it seems so.
So a rabbi, if someone tells a rabbi that they've had a vasectomy, then the rabbi
Why would they tell the rabbi that?
I don't know, because the rabbi's taking their history. If it comes up in conversation.
History. That's something between him and her. Why would you tell that to the rabbi? You confide everything to the rabbi?
No, but if the rabbi knew that someone had a vasectomy, then he couldn't marry them.
Yes, I guess so. But why would you know that? You don't ask those questions and you don't know. But yeah, valid point. Says the Gemara further. Unless it happened because he was very sick and he had to save his life that way or something, whatever. Let's continue more. So now I lost the place. So this rabbi, one of the rabbis said to Rabbi, interesting question. All the Torah says that Patsua Daka, if there was a wound, if there was crushed, how do you know what was crushed? What are we talking about here? How do we know talking about a male member? Maybe it means something in his head or something else. How do you know it means? How do you know it means the male member? Says the Gemara, Omalei, Everything else by a mamzat says the 10th generation, and by a moini by a mitzi we say the 3rd generation you can come back. But when it comes to over here to Psudaka, it doesn't mention generations. You know why? Because there are no generations. Because it's the kind of person that cannot procreate. So there's nothing to talk about future generations. So that's how we know what we're talking about. We're talking about the place that you can procreate from. Says the Gemara, no, that's no proof. But you know why I don't mention generations? The maybe because that's a halacha. But when it comes to this kind of a person, Sudaka, maybe it's talking about something on the head, something went wrong in the head, we'll see. But he was able to procreate, and the children are permitted to get married to Jewish women. It's only that's forbidden. Dumya de Krushavcha, because it says in the pasuk Lo Yaveh Psudaka Krushavcha V'Kal Hashem, we put the two together. Ma Krushavcha, when it talks about Krushavcha, when you cut. Definitely talking about in that particular place is Afhai Nami Baisa Makum. He's also talking about the male member. Says the Gemara, who told you? Who told you Krushavcha means that particular place? What does Krushavcha mean? You cut and now it's flowing. Maybe talking about a cut on your lips. Maybe if you cut the lips and now there's drooling all the time. Maybe that's what it's talking about. You're not going to get married. Says the Gemara, Shavcha Ksi b'Mokum Sheshayfa. Because it says Shavcha, it means that a place that you pour from, and therefore it's not your mouth. You don't pour from your mouth or your lips, because as Rashi says, when it comes to saliva and these things, you usually when you spit it out, it turns into spittle. You spit it far away from you, and and therefore it's not Shavcha. You don't pour from your mouth. Okay, so we're not talking about your lips. Maybe it's talking about from your nose. And from your nose, it does sort of pours out. So the Gemara miksiv, does it say in the pasuk b'shvoi? Does it say in the pasuk that you're pouring out krushavcha ksiv? B'shvoi means that it always pours from there. Krushavcha means you cut it now, and now as a result of your cutting, it starts pouring from there. So therefore, can I be talking about the nose? Because the nose is a constant source of pouring. We're talking about somewhere that you cut, that as a result of that cutting, it's now flowing out. But before you cut it, before there was crushed, whatever it is, that particular male member, it wasn't shayfik pouring, it was sort of not throwing far away, but it wasn't just pouring right out. It was like pouring out with a little bit of strength. It was, and therefore it could only be talking about the male member. Says the Gemara, by the nose, before and after. If you cut your nose, before it was running out of your nose, and afterwards running out of your nose, nothing changed. Mashenkin here, what we're talking about by a male member, as a result of what happened, it's no longer no longer like sort of hurling out. It's now just pouring out. Tana, we learn, Nemar says, it says that Tzudaka shouldn't enter the fold. But Nemar says, I'll give you another answer. How do we know what we're talking about? It says, how do you know talking about where the male members? It says, Nemar says, just like over there, it's talking about the male member. We're also talking about the male member. Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about the anatomy. Nikiv lemata ma'atar. What happens if there's a puncture below? Okay, when we say below and above, we're talking about a person standing and the male member is limp, so it's hanging down. So when we say below, means it's going downwards away from the person's body, and above means closer to the person's body. So that which closer to the body is called lemaila, and further from the body is called lemata. So Nikav lemata ma'atara. So what happens if there was a puncture, but the puncture was like on the crown, or what they call corona, of the male member? And the way Rashi learns that you put that you made a puncture starting from, I guess, closer to your body, and it went through the corona, which is on top where and it went out that way there. So Nikav lemata ma'atara shekinegda lemaila ma'atara. So you started from lemata matara, away from your body, and you ended up making a puncture on the other side towards your body. He thought it should be kosher. He thought it should be kosher because we learned in the mission, from that Torah is all right. As long as you have one hair left hanging, it's all right. That since the puncture goes through the atara towards yourself, it makes the person puzzle and needs a ksira psuadaka. Then the Mishnah said, the im nishtayir from the atara. If any part of that Torah was left over, even just the hair is all right. Yosef Ravina sat there and was wondering when it says over there that if it's even just a hair, a string, a thread, Shamru al Pnei Kula, and we said that you're still all right, you're still not up to a daka al Pnei Kula Pnei Ruva. Do we mean that the entire corona has a hair, or a hair or like a thread? And therefore then it's kosher, or even if the majority of the atara had this a little bit left over, the width of a thread is good enough. So Rava Tesva said to Ravina, he says as long as the majority is good enough, but the kalapedation, but it has to be towards closer to you, the part of the atara which is closer to you, to the person. And then if majority of you lost most of that atara, you have a little bit of this like the width of a thread covering most of the circumference, it's good enough. Amar Ravuna, we continue. Ravuna said, now I'll tell you right now, the next part I don't really understand the anatomy here, so I will just say what it says here. Amar Ravuna said, if you, let's say you cut the gid, the actual member, you cut it like the tip of a pen. So it's like a triangle. You cut it like a tip of a pen. It is kosher. It is still kosher. And kemarziv, but if you cut it straight down like a drain, then puzzle like a drain pipe. Then puzzle it is puzzle. Why is that? He said, "Hi." If it's like a drain pipe straight all the way down, and you cut it that way from both sides, you shal it ba'avira, then the air enters and therefore it ruins the sperm and you cannot procreate. But v'hai, in the other case where you cut it down like a triangle, then lo shal it ba'avira, no outside air comes in, and therefore you're still able to generate sperm. I really don't know what exactly. I can't picture this, so I'm just saying what it says here. However,
doesn't ArtScroll have pictures?
Sorry?
Doesn't ArtScroll have pictures?
Lions also have pictures?
No.
Okay. Rab Chizda says, Kemarziv shaded all the way around. He says, if it's like this drain pipe, it is kosher. But if it's like a kulma, like the tip of a pen, like triangle, it is possible. And why is that? He says, hi, Gerida. He said the difference is because where it's like a drain pipe, then Haigorid, it sort of draws out, it schleps out the semen. But Vahai, in the case where it's like a triangle pen, the tip of a pen, like Gorid, it doesn't draw out the semen and therefore you cannot procreate. Omar Rava says Rava, Kavasa Rav Huna Mistabra makes more sense like Rav Huna, which is like a drain pipe, like a pen, it's kosher and a drain pipe is possible. Why? Because high loy shal bavira, high shal bavira. Here you have the extraneous air coming in and it sort of cools it down and takes away all the sperm, and this one doesn't. Omar Mazuta Mashmei Rapapa. So Mazuta said the name of Rapapa. Sorry, a simple one. Omar Imishum Greidusa. What about your question that here it draws out the semen? Midi the have a barza the chavisa. It is like when it comes to like a tap or a faucet that you attach to a barrel, and I'm not exactly sure how it works, but the semen can be drawn out as well by a kulmus. I'm not exactly sure how that works. This is what Mazut said. Papa Hilchos, the halach is bein big kulmus, bein kemarzik shel. The halach is whether it's like they're both kosher. They're both kosher for the reasons that each one said, that this one is either the semen is drawn out, or this one says that the extraneous air doesn't come in. Miu meboile. What my question is, however, Whether we're talking about over here, where did you start cutting it from? From lamata matora, further away from your body, or above that, or above the crown, closer to your body? Says the Gemara, the whole issue is only talking about when it's closer to your body, because these are that lamata matora, because they were talking about that it was cut below that Torah, away from your body. Then we just learned before, even a hair breadth, even if it's even if let's say you cut most of it off, it's still all right. So Gemara said, but Ravina was just testing Menema to see if he was on the ball or not. Okay, there was a story, an incident. There was an incident that occurred in the city of Mechasia, and where it was cut like a marziv, like a drain pipe. And Shafia Marbar Rav Ashi then took it and he reshaped it kikumus, and he reshaped it like the tip of that pen. The achre. Then he said it's kosher, and you can go ahead and get married. There was a story that happened in Pumbedisa. There's another story happened in Pumbedisa. He started Gufsa the Sheikh Vazera, that the particular vein, whatever it is that carries all the semen, got blocked. But Afik Makam Tanim. Rashi says that that there were two different, I guess, exits, one for urine and one for semen. And what happened here was because I don't think that's accepted today, or maybe our nature changed. And what happened was the semen valve there was a valve there, something got blocked, so the semen was coming out through the same exit as the urine. Savara Bibi, Shik was Api Makum Tana, came out when the urine comes out. Savara Bibi is of the opinion, but Abai Lachshude to say that it's kosher. In fact, is he could generate semen. A puppy said no, Mishum the Asu Memuloi, because he comes from a broken up family. This is Abaya's son. And we learned already in a few places that Abaye was a descendant from Eli, and so was Rabbah. And Eli had a curse that none of his children will live too long, or his descendants. So Rabbah passed away at the age of 40. Abaye passed away at the age of 60 because Abaye gave tzedakah as well, didn't just learn. And so he said, this is Abaye's son, Rabbibi, because he came of a family that was cut off their legs because they all died young. Amrita Milinus, he's saying things which don't make sense, which are half stories. Only when the semen comes out from the correct valve, from the correct, let's say, vein or tube, the semen has the power to procreate. But if it's coming out to the urine, it does not have the capacity to procreate. Just quickly, a few lines. You said name is Shmuel. What happens if there was a puncture? And we said before that it renders the person a psudaka, but then venistim, it sort of grew over, and now it was covered over. What happens now? Kol she'ilu nikri v'nikra posel. If, let's say, every time you create semen, it tears again, it rips again, then you are posel. It means obviously you cannot you're suadaka. But the im lav, if it doesn't rip again, kosher is kosher. Havi Baravas, Rabbi just wondered, where exactly is this puncture? That if you can talk about closer to your body, then I feel a nichras nami. But what about a puncture? Even if it's cut off. If it's lamata means further from your body, then we learned before that even most of that Torah was cut off, it's kosher. So who cares if there's a puncture by if it's only in the crown? Ella ba'Torah atzma. We're talking about not all the flesh which is above the crown. We're talking about the ridge of the crown itself, and that's where we say this did. Even if there was a puncture in that Torah itself, but it got sealed. And this is the criteria. Every time you have semen, it rips a pus. You love kosher is kosher.